"He ate the seed from my garden," said the little girl to the doctors about the millionaire. And the miracle happened. If you found this story interesting, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. In the imposing structure of St. Raphael's Hospital in New Orleans, considered one of the most advanced medical centers in the American South, the aseptic and controlled environment had been, for days, filled with a palpable unease. Doctors and specialists walked the corridors with tense expressions and furtive glances that avoided direct contact. The administrative staff, normally discreet, was now seen in constant emergency meetings, and even the security guards seemed more alert and present at strategic points in the building. In the hospital's private wing, occupying the presidential suite equipped with state-of-the-art technology, lay Richard Vance, founder of HealthTech America, one of the country's largest medical technology companies, hospitalized in critical condition. The symptoms had begun subtly during a charity dinner: fatigue, nausea, difficulty breathing. At first, everyone thought it was a passing malaise, perhaps a bout of exhaustion after months of international travel to expand his business. But within a few hours, his condition had progressed to a mysterious respiratory failure, perplexing the doctors who could not reach a conclusive diagnosis. Richard was a controversial public figure in Louisiana and across the United States. He was admired by many for his pioneering work in bringing technological innovations to American public health, creating systems that shortened hospital queues and facilitated access to medication in underserved regions. However, he was also harshly criticized for his inflexible business practices and for controversial episodes involving disputes with traditional communities over the extraction of medicinal plants from the Louisiana bayou, which were to be used in research for new drugs. His sudden hospitalization became national news. Reporters camped out at the entrance of St. Raphael's, while on social media, theories multiplied, from corporate sabotage by competitors to curses from shamans of indigenous communities affected by his companies. The pressure on the medical team was immense. Led by Dr. Cecilia Hale, a renowned neurologist and the hospital's clinical director, they performed an endless battery of tests, from MRIs to cutting-edge genetic panels, but nothing pointed to a concrete cause. Richard's body seemed to be shutting down, from the inside out, for no apparent reason. "We have already checked for all known markers of poisoning," Dr. Hale explained to Richard's wife, Carmen Vance, an influential socialite who rarely left her husband's bedside. "We've done advanced toxicological analyses, tests for rare tropical diseases, even consultations with international specialists via telemedicine." Carmen, with teary eyes but the impeccable posture that characterized her, replied, "Money is not an issue, doctor. Bring whoever is necessary. My husband cannot. He cannot leave us like this." In the same hospital, in the quiet backstage where TV cameras did not reach and VIP visitor passes did not circulate, worked Irene Olivier. A cleaning assistant for almost 10 years, Irene was part of that invisible army of workers that keeps any hospital running. A descendant of a family from rural Louisiana, she carried a heritage of Cajun and indigenous traditions in her name, and, in her knowledge, the wisdom passed down by her grandmother Jerima, a former connoisseur of the region's medicinal herbs. Irene was the single mother of Tiana, a bright 7-year-old girl with lively, curious eyes. Due to the difficulty of affording a babysitter during her night shifts, and with no close relatives in New Orleans, Tiana often accompanied her mother on the longest nights, after school had ended, and there was no one to leave her with. The hospital administration turned a blind eye to this situation, as long as the girl remained quiet in a discreet corner of the employee reception area, where she would draw and watch the intense activity of the place. "Mom, have you seen how many people in fancy clothes are coming in today?" Tiana asked, sitting in her usual spot, scribbling in a used notebook she had received from one of the nurses. Irene gently stroked her daughter's hair. "It's because of that rich man who is sick, honey. Everyone wants to know what's happening to him." "The one in the big room at the end of the hall, the one with the strange smell?" the girl questioned, wrinkling her nose. Irene stiffened for a moment. "What smell, Tiana? And how do you know he's in that room? You shouldn't be wandering around there." The girl shrugged with the naturalness typical of childhood. "I didn't go all the way there, Mom. But when you were cleaning the hallway yesterday, I smelled something coming from there. It's sweet, but with a bitter note underneath, just like that plant of Grandma Jurema's." That seemingly innocent observation echoed in Irene's mind as she carried out her tasks. Tiana had always had a keen sense of smell and an impressive memory for aromas, characteristics that reminded her of her grandmother. In the modest backyard of the house where they lived, on the outskirts of New Orleans, Irene maintained a small garden of medicinal herbs, a cultural inheritance from her family. Among the mint, boldo, and lemon balm grew a different plant, known by the locals as Bayou Sai, whose seeds, when broken, released a peculiar aroma, exactly what Tiana had described. That night, after her shift, Irene watched her daughter sleeping on the sofa in the employee break room and allowed her mind to wander back a few months to when Tiana's pet turtle, a gift from her grandmother, had mysteriously fallen ill. The small animal became lethargic, with no appetite and labored breathing. Irene thought there was no hope left, but Tiana, guided by something that mixed what she had learned from her grandmother with an impressive intuition, insisted on preparing a homemade remedy. "Grandma always said that what harms can also heal," Mom, the girl had stated on that occasion, with a seriousness that didn't match her age. "He ate a seed from the Bayou Sai, I saw him. But the bark from the root will help." Against her adult common sense, Irene allowed her daughter to grind part of the plant's root bark and mix it into the turtle's water. To her surprise, in 2 days the animal had recovered, moving about as if it had never been sick. At the hospital, as the night wore on, comments about Richard Vance's critical condition spread among the staff. Whispered conversations in the hallways mentioned that the doctors were reaching the limits of their abilities. That expensive equipment had been brought in hastily, and even that international specialists were being consulted via video conference. "They say he won't make it through the week," a nursing technician murmured during a late-night coffee break. "All the tests are clean, but he keeps getting worse by the hour. He's already on mechanical ventilation, and his organs have started showing signs of failure." Irene remained silent, absorbing the information while performing her meticulous cleaning duties. It was not in her nature to participate in hospital gossip, but something about this particular case had piqued her attention. Tiana's words about the smell, the memory of the sick turtle, and now the described symptoms of the businessman. Everything seemed connected by an invisible thread she couldn't yet fully grasp. The next morning, during the main medical team's rounds, Irene was cleaning the hallway near the conference room when she unintentionally overheard part of the discussion among the specialists. "It makes no sense at all," said a male voice she recognized as Dr. Paul H. Matthews, a respected toxicologist. "All markers are normal. There's no infection, no known poison, no identifiable primary organ failure. It's as if something is simply shutting down his systems one by one." "Perhaps we should consider unconventional causes," suggested another voice. "There are compounds in the biodiversity of the bayou that are still uncatalogued. Considering his company's activities with bioprospecting of native plants." "Please, Dr. Campos, let's not venture into the territory of speculation," interrupted the firm voice of Dr. Hale. "We need to stick to the science. Let's expand the toxicology panel and repeat the battery of neurological exams. And we need to be quick. His condition is deteriorating rapidly." That conversation hammered in Irene's head all day. When she picked Tiana up from school and they returned to the hospital for her night shift, she watched her daughter more closely as the girl settled into her usual corner in the reception area. "Tiana," she called in a low voice, kneeling beside her daughter. "That smell you smelled in the hallway, are you sure it's the same as the Bayou Sai?" The girl nodded without looking up from her drawing. "Exactly the same, Mom, just stronger. It's coming from that big room. And do you remember what happened to the turtle when he ate the seed?" Tiana finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting her mother's with an understanding that seemed beyond her years. "He got really weak, breathing funny. It looked like he was going to sleep and never wake up. That's why we made the medicine from the bark." A shiver ran down Irene's spine. The coincidences were too many to be ignored. But what could she do? She was just a cleaning assistant, invisible to most of the doctors and nurses, except when they needed something cleaned urgently. That night, while cleaning near the suite where Richard was hospitalized, Irene noticed more commotion than usual. Emergency equipment was being rushed into the room, and the expressions of the professionals entering and leaving were of extreme concern. From what she could overhear in the hurried comments, the businessman had suffered a sharp drop in his vital signs and was now fighting to stay alive. It was then that Tiana, who was supposed to be in the reception area, appeared silently by her side, as if drawn by some invisible force. She looked at the room's door and then at her mother, with absolute certainty etched on her childish face. "He ate the seed of the bayou's sigh, Mom," she said simply, as if stating that the sky was blue. "Just like the turtle." Irene felt a knot in her stomach. Tiana's conviction was disconcerting. She placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders, torn between sending her back to the reception or listening to what seemed to be an extraordinary intuition. "How can you be so sure, honey?" "I just know, Mom. It's the same smell, the same thing that happened. And I dreamed about Grandma Jerima last night. She showed me the man lying in bed and pointed to the plant in our backyard." Under any other circumstances, Irene would have dismissed it as childish imagination. But she knew the stories about her grandmother, Jurema, who in her lifetime had been sought out by people from all social classes for cures that conventional medicine could not offer. It was said in the family that Tiana had inherited not only a name in homage to her indigenous great-grandmother, but also her gifts. At the end of that hallway, a man was fighting for his life, while highly specialized medical teams found themselves powerless. And there she was, Irene, holding her broom with an improbable theory based on the observation of a 7-year-old child. "Go back to the reception, Tiana," she said finally, making a decision. "Mommy needs to talk to someone." The girl obeyed without question, as if she already knew her mission was accomplished. Irene took a deep breath, adjusted her uniform and, going against all her instincts of self-preservation and hierarchy, walked towards the room where the doctors were meeting to discuss the case. It was at that moment that she saw Dr. Andre Campos leaving the suite, looking exhausted and disheartened. Of all the doctors, he had always treated her with respect, greeting her by name and occasionally asking about Tiana, whom he remembered seeing a few times in the reception area. "Dr. Campos," she called out, mustering all her courage, "I need to speak with you. It's about the patient in the presidential suite." The doctor stopped, surprised, and looked at her with curiosity. In his tired eyes, Irene saw a glimmer of something that might be her last hope, the open mind of a scientist who, having exhausted all conventional possibilities, was ready to hear the improbable. "It's about the smell coming from his room," Irene continued, her throat feeling dry, "and about a plant we know from the countryside. My daughter thinks he might have been poisoned by it. And if that's the case, we might know how to help." Dr. Campos remained silent for a few seconds, as if evaluating not only her words but the desperate situation they were in. Finally, he motioned for her to follow him into a small empty room nearby. "Tell me everything," he said simply. "From the beginning." And so, on the night shift of one of the most technologically advanced hospitals in the United States, a cleaning assistant began to narrate to a renowned doctor a story about a mysterious plant from rural Louisiana, a turtle that almost lost its life, and a little girl with the special gift of her indigenous great-grandmother. Meanwhile, in the presidential suite, the monitors continued to record Richard Vance's silent struggle against an enemy that modern medicine could not yet identify. The next few hours would be decisive, not only for the businessman's fate, but for an unexpected encounter between ancestral knowledge and contemporary science. The conversation between Irene Olivier and Dr. Andre Campos lasted for nearly an hour in that small conference room. Initially skeptical, the doctor gradually yielded to the simple yet consistent logic the cleaning assistant presented. A graduate of the prestigious Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, with specializations in toxicology in Europe, Dr. Campos was known at St. Raphael's for his scientific rigor, but also for his open mind towards alternative medicines and traditional knowledge, a rarity among specialists of his caliber. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," he recapped, massaging his temples as he mentally organized the information. "Your daughter Tiana identified a specific odor coming from Mr. Vance's room that she associates with a plant called Bayou's Sigh. Months ago, your pet experienced symptoms similar to our patients after ingesting seeds from this plant, and was cured with an extract from the root bark. Irene nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. She had never imagined being in a situation like this, explaining ancestral knowledge to a renowned doctor in a setting that could define the fate of one of the most powerful men in the country. Yes, doctor. It sounds crazy, I know. But Tiana has a special gift. She inherited it from my grandmother Jurema, who was a highly respected healer back in the country. When she says she recognizes the smell and knows what's happening, I just believe her. Dr. Campos was silent for a few moments, pondering. As a physician, he had been trained to follow protocols, trust evidence, and be wary of correlations without scientific proof. However, as a genuine scientist, he also knew that many modern medicines originated from traditional knowledge about plants, and that the Louisiana Bayou and the Amazon still hid countless species with unknown pharmacological properties. What intrigues me, he said finally, is how Mr. Vance would have come into contact with this plant. From what I know, he hasn't traveled to the countryside in months. His routine has been between New Orleans, New York City, and international trips. Irene bit her lip, thoughtful. I don't know, doctor, but I know this plant isn't common. My grandmother used to say it only grows in specific regions of Louisiana and Mississippi, in areas that still preserve native vegetation. A detail suddenly illuminated the doctor's mind. Wait a moment. A few weeks ago, as I was passing through the VIP reception, I noticed Mr. Vance receiving a package. He mentioned something about it being a gift from a rural community, where his company was developing a project. It was a basket with natural products, if I recall correctly. He stood up abruptly and walked to the computer in the room. Let's check the security cameras. The hospital keeps recordings for 30 days, if we're lucky. After a few minutes of navigating the internal system, Dr. Campos located the recording. In it, Richard Vance was clearly visible in the reception area, receiving a package decorated with natural fibers from a plainly dressed man who looked like a farm worker. The businessman opened the basket, examined its contents with apparent satisfaction, and tasted something that looked like a small fruit or seed. My God, the doctor murmured, zooming in on the image. He actually ingested something from that basket, right there in the reception. That was exactly 3 days before the onset of his symptoms. Irene moved closer to see. Doctor, we need to find out who brought that basket and what was in it. I agree. But in the meantime, we need to act. Mr. Vance's condition is critical, and we're out of conventional options. Dr. Campos looked at her seriously. Irene, do you think your daughter would be willing to show us this plant? And could you prepare the root extract as you did for the animal? The cleaning assistant felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. It was one thing to use traditional knowledge to save a pet turtle. It was another thing entirely to interfere with the treatment of a critically ill patient in a top-tier hospital. I can bring the plant, doctor. As for the extract, my grandmother always said that natural remedies must be prepared with pure intention. I don't know if it would work if I made it, while thinking about all the complications. It would have to be Tiana. She has the gift. Dr. Campos nodded, understanding. I understand your concerns, but I must be honest. We are running out of options. Mr. Vance's organs are failing one by one, and our treatments are having no effect. If your theory is correct, this may be his only chance. As they spoke, a commotion in the hallway indicated a new complication in Richard's condition. Without wasting time, the doctor made a decision. Bring the plant tomorrow morning. I will speak with Dr. Hale and the family. I can't promise they will accept, but I will do my part to present this possibility. The next morning, Irene arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, bringing a small pot with the Bayou Sai and, in a separate bag, some already harvested roots. Tiana exceptionally accompanied her, after Irene managed to get special permission from the administration, explaining that her daughter might be able to help with a specific case. They were met at the employee entrance by Dr. Campos, who looked as if he hadn't slept. His face showed the fatigue of a night of arguments and explanations. I managed to convince the medical team to at least consider this possibility, he explained, guiding them to the clinical analysis laboratory. Dr. Hale was extremely skeptical, as expected, but when I showed her the recordings and explained the correlation of the symptoms, she agreed to analyze the plant. Mr. Vance's wife, however, he hesitated, glancing at Tiana, as if measuring his words in front of the child. She doesn't believe in the treatment. Irene asked, understanding his hesitation. It's not quite that. She's torn. On one hand, she's desperate and willing to try anything. On the other, she has fears about unconventional methods. But she agreed to let us analyze the plant, and if there is any scientific evidence to support the theory, she will consider authorizing the experimental treatment. In the lab, a team of technicians and Dr. Hale herself were waiting. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with grey hair impeccably tied in a bun and a penetrating gaze behind thin-rimmed glasses, watched with curiosity as Irene placed the pot on the counter. "This is the plant in question?" she asked, moving closer to examine it. "Yes, doctor. We call it Bayou Sai. It grows mainly in shaded areas of the Louisiana Bayou." Dr. Hale turned to Tiana, who was observing everything with attentive eyes, seeming much more at ease in that clinical environment than one might expect from a child. "And you, little one, are the one who identified the scent of this plant in Mr. Vance's room." Tiana nodded, holding the doctor's gaze without intimidation. "Yes, ma'am. It's the same as the smell that was on my turtle when he ate the seed, only stronger. And how did you know which part of the plant to use to cure your animal? Grandma Jurema taught me that what harms can also heal. The seed hurts, but the bark from the root heals. It's the balance." A brief smile softened Dr. Hale's severe expression. "Ancestral wisdom," she murmured. "Hippocrates said something similar more than 2,000 years ago." Turning to the technical team, the doctor gave precise instructions for samples of all parts of the plant to be analyzed immediately. Leaves, stem, root, seeds. "I want a complete profile of the active compounds, top priority, and compare them with the blood and tissue samples from Mr. Vance. Look for any correlation." While the technicians began their work, Dr. Campos led Irene and Tiana to a small break room, where he offered them juice and cookies. "Now we have to wait. St. Raphael's lab is one of the most advanced in the country. If there's anything in this plant that could be affecting Mr. Vance, they will find it." Hours passed. Tiana, exhausted by the tension and lack of sleep, fell asleep on the sofa. Irene remained vigilant, torn between the hope of being able to help and the fear of the consequences if she was wrong. Dr. Campos occasionally left to check on the progress of the analyses and the patient's condition. Near noon, the door opened and Dr. Hale entered holding several pages of results. Her expression was a mixture of astonishment and respect. "The preliminary results are impressive," she announced, waking Tiana with the sound of her voice. "The seed of the Bayou Sai contains an alkaloid that is not listed in any of our pharmacological databases. In initial tests, this compound has shown an extremely specific affinity for receptors in the respiratory and cardiac systems." She placed the papers on the table. "Even more surprising, we found traces of this same compound in Mr. Vance's blood. The concentration is low but consistent with an ingestion that occurred approximately a week ago." Dr. Campos let out a sigh of relief. "So the theory is correct. He ingested the seed, probably from that basket of natural products." "Yes," Dr. Hale agreed. "As for the root bark, we also found interesting bioactive compounds. One of them appears to function as a direct antagonist to the seed's alkaloid, potentially neutralizing its toxic effects." She turned to Irene and Tiana with a new look of respect. "You were right. Your traditional knowledge identified something that our modern science would have taken weeks or months to discover, if it ever did." Irene felt tears well up in her eyes, a mixture of relief and pride. She hugged Tiana, who was smiling discreetly. "What happens now?" the cleaning assistant asked. "Now we need to prepare an extract from the root bark that is safe for intravenous use," Dr. Hale explained. "Our pharmacists are already working on it, but—" She hesitated, looking at Tiana. "Given the unique nature of this situation, I believe it would be valuable to have your daughter observe the process. If she truly has a special connection to this plant, as it seems she does, her presence could be important." The news that a possible treatment had been found spread quickly through the hospital. Carmen Vance, after a tense meeting with the medical team, finally authorized the use of the experimental extract, understanding that it was possibly the only chance for her husband. In the hospital's pharmaceutical lab, an unusual scene was unfolding. Tiana, dressed in a child-sized lab coat provided especially for the occasion, watched intently as the pharmacists processed the root bark, following both scientific protocols and the girl's guidance on the traditional method of preparation. "You can't boil it too much," she instructed, with the confidence of someone who had performed this procedure for decades, not just once in her short life. Grandma said that strong heat kills the spirit of the plant. The chief pharmacist, Dr. Ronald Marks, a man of science who had initially resisted the idea of having a child opining in his lab, was surprised to note that Tiana's observations coincided with pharmacological principles about protein, denaturation, and the degradation of bioactive compounds by excessive heat. "The girl has a scientific intuition," he commented to Dr. Hale, as they checked the purified and concentrated extract that would be administered intravenously. Meanwhile, in the presidential suite, the tension was palpable. Richard Vance was now connected to multiple life support machines. His breathing was entirely controlled by a mechanical ventilator, and monitors displayed the ever-weakening signs of his failing organs. Carmen remained by his side, holding his limp hand, whispering words of encouragement. She had aged years in just a few days, and her normally impeccable posture showed signs of exhaustion. "He has to hold on," she murmured to Dr. Campos, who was checking the vital signs. "We just started building the pediatric hospital in the 9th ward. It was his dream, you know, to use technology to democratize access to quality healthcare." The doctor nodded sympathetically. He was well aware of the dichotomy of Richard Vance, a ruthless businessman, but also a philanthropist genuinely concerned with social causes. "We will do everything in our power, Mrs. Vance. The extract is being prepared as we speak." At the suite's door, a discreet security guard controlled access. The news that an experimental treatment would be attempted had leaked to the press, and reporters were trying at all costs to obtain additional information. Among them stood out Claudia Foster, an investigative journalist known for her reports on the controversial use of indigenous lands by large corporations, including, in the past, Richard Vance's companies. Claudia had tried, unsuccessfully, to interview hospital staff about the rumors that the experimental treatment involved indigenous knowledge. Her source, a nursing technician who preferred to remain anonymous, had mentioned a rare plant and a child with special gifts, but could not provide concrete details. Meanwhile, in the hospital's administrative offices, an extraordinary meeting of the Medical and Legal Board was discussing the implications of authorizing a treatment based on traditional knowledge, even if supported by preliminary laboratory analysis. "We are setting a dangerous precedent," argued Dr. Matthews, representing the more conservative wing. "If something goes wrong, the responsibility will fall on all of us, and the fallout for St. Raphael's reputation would be devastating. And if we don't try, we will be denying the patient his only chance," countered Dr. Campos. "The compounds have been identified, tested preliminarily, and the correlation with the symptoms is undeniable. We are not administering a miracle tea, but a purified extract whose active principles have been isolated and analyzed." The discussion was interrupted when Dr. Hale entered the room, holding the final lab report. "The extract is ready and has passed safety tests. The patient's wife has authorized the procedure, assuming all responsibility. As clinical director, I am approving its compassionate use on an emergency basis." Her decision, made with the authority her position afforded her, ended the debate. In situations of imminent risk to life, protocol allowed for experimental treatments to be administered under certain conditions, all of which were met in this unique situation. Back in Richard's room, the medical team prepared to administer the extract. Carmen, after signing all the necessary consent forms, had requested a moment alone with her husband. Dr. Campos respected her wish, leaving her in the suite for a few minutes. In the hallway, he found Irene and Tiana, who were waiting anxiously. The cleaning assistant had been relieved of her duties for the day, given the exceptional nature of the situation. "We are about to begin," the doctor informed them. "The extract will be administered intravenously, in gradual doses so we can monitor for any adverse reactions." Tiana, who had been sitting and drawing, looked up at the doctor. "It will work, doctor. But it takes 3 days, just like the turtle. First, he'll seem to get worse, but that's the poison leaving." Dr. Campos knelt to be at the girl's eye level. "How do you know that, Tiana?" The child shrugged with that disconcerting simplicity. Grandma told me in my dream. She said balance always demands a price before it is restored. The doctor smiled gently, touched by the girl's intuitive wisdom. We will watch him closely then, and we thank you both very much for your help. At that moment, Dr. Hale emerged from the elevator, accompanied by 2 nurses carrying the prepared extract. She greeted Irene and Tiana with a respectful nod and headed towards the suite, ready to begin the procedure that could represent the last hope for Richard Vance. Minutes later, with Carmen watching anxiously by the bed, the extract began to be slowly administered into Richard's intravenous system. All monitors were adjusted to detect the slightest change in his vital signs, and a full team remained on standby to intervene if any complications arose. The first few hours were of silent apprehension. No significant change was recorded, neither for the better nor for the worse. At 6 p.m., 6 hours after the experimental treatment began, Dr. Campos took a break to rest and have some coffee, finding Irene and Tiana again in the small waiting room reserved for them. No change yet, he reported, but there have been no adverse reactions either, which is already a positive sign. Tiana, who was sitting by the window watching the sunset over the city of New Orleans, turned to the doctor with a calm smile. The sun needs to set and rise 3 times, doctor. Patience. Her unwavering confidence was comforting, though Dr. Campos knew that time was not on their side. Richard's organs were at the limit of their endurance, and the medical team was debating behind the scenes whether to continue the experimental treatment if there was no improvement in the next 24 hours. The following morning, as Tiana had predicted, Richard's condition seemed to have worsened. His vital signs fluctuated dangerously, and a moderate fever had set in during the night. Dr. Matthews, who had taken over the shift, almost stopped the treatment, only to be prevented by an emergency call from Dr. Campos, who recalled Tiana's prediction about this apparent decline. "It's the body fighting the poison," the doctor explained, repeating what the girl had said. "We need to continue. If we stop now, we lose the only chance we have." Reluctantly, Dr. Matthews agreed to maintain the treatment for another 24 hours, provided there was no critical deterioration in the patient's condition. Meanwhile, in the hospital corridors, the rumors about the unconventional treatment took on new dimensions. Some staff members spoke of indigenous magic, others of a scientific miracle. Security was tightened to prevent distorted information from leaking to the press, which maintained a permanent vigil at the entrance of St. Raphael's. Irene, realizing the scale of the situation, began to worry about the consequences for her and Tiana when it was all over. If the treatment failed, they would be seen as charlatans who offered false hope. If it worked, their lives would never be the same. The privacy and simplicity they valued so much could be threatened by public attention. "What do we do after this, honey?" she asked Tiana as they ate lunch in the employee cafeteria. "When this is all over, where do we go?" The girl, chewing her meal calmly, answered with the same serenity as always. "Home, Mom. Grandma Jurema said our job is just to show the way. Afterwards, we go back to our garden." Irene smiled, once again amazed by her daughter's natural wisdom. It was true. They had done their part by showing the way. The rest was in the hands of the doctors and Richard Vance's own life force. At the end of that second day, as night fell over New Orleans and the hospital lights intensified, something began to change on the monitors in the presidential suite. At first, the changes were subtle, the heart rate stabilizing, the oxygen saturation rising a few points, the blood pressure finding a more regular rhythm. Dr. Campos, who had returned for the night shift specifically to monitor the case, watched the numbers with heightened attention, fearing they were just temporary fluctuations before a final decline. "Doctor," called Nurse Teresa, who was monitoring the neurological signs, "the EEG is showing increased brain activity, and the fever is breaking." The doctor moved closer to verify for himself. It was true. There were unequivocal signs of improvement, albeit modest. Something in the extract seemed to be working, gradually neutralizing the toxic effects of the mysterious seed. Carmen, who had fallen asleep in an armchair by the bed after days of vigil, awoke with the movement in the suite. "What's happening?" "Is he—" "He's improving, Mrs. Vance," Dr. Campos confirmed, allowing himself a cautious smile. These are preliminary signs, but they are consistent. We need to keep observing, but there is reason for optimism. The woman jumped up, moving closer to the bed to see her husband. For the first time in days, her expression showed something beyond despair, a glimmer of hope. He's going to survive then? He's going to come back to us. It's too early to make definitive statements, the doctor replied, always cautious. But the treatment appears to be having an effect. If he continues to progress at this rate, we might have a clearer picture tomorrow. Carmen turned to him, tears in her eyes. I want to personally thank the family that brought the plant. The cleaning assistant and her daughter. May I meet them? Dr. Campos hesitated, thinking of Irene and her concerns about exposure. I will ask if they would like to come here. But I should warn you, they are very private people. In the hallway, as he used the internal phone to contact the room where Irene and Tiana were staying, Dr. Campos was surprised by the approach of Claudia Foster, the investigative journalist who had somehow managed to bypass security on the floor. Dr. Andre Campos, she called out, recorder in hand. Is it true that you are using traditional indigenous knowledge to treat Richard Vance, and that a child is involved in the process? The doctor recoiled, clearly uncomfortable. How did you get up here? This is a restricted area. The public has a right to know what's happening, doctor, especially when it involves ancestral knowledge that companies like Vance's often exploit without due credit or compensation to traditional communities. Before Dr. Campos could respond, a security guard finally noticed the journalist's presence and approached quickly. Claudia was escorted away, but not before delivering one last comment. I will uncover this story, Doctor. And when the truth comes out, many questions will have to be answered. The incident left Dr. Campos apprehensive. The last thing Irene and Tiana needed was to become the center of a media controversy. He decided to reinforce security around them and warn them about the situation. Upon returning to the presidential suite, he found an unexpected scene. Richard Vance had slightly moved the fingers of his right hand. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but significant for someone who had been completely motionless for days. He's coming back, Carmen murmured, holding her husband's hand with renewed strength. Dr. Campos checked the patient's pupils, which responded to light for the first time in 72 hours. Yes, he confirmed, feeling the weight of the last few days finally lift from his shoulders. He's coming back. The news of the improvement spread quickly through the hospital, eventually reaching Irene and Tiana, who received the information with discreet but satisfied smiles. For them, there had never really been any doubt about the outcome, only about what would come next. See, Mom? Tiana said, as they prepared for bed that night in the makeshift room the hospital had provided. Just like the turtle. 3 days. Tomorrow he'll be awake. Irene hugged her daughter, once again marveling at the extraordinary gift she carried. You did something incredible, honey. You saved an important man's life. Tiana yawned, settling into the pillows. It wasn't me, Mom, it was the plant. Grandma always said, we don't heal anything. We just remind the body how to heal itself. As the girl drifted off to sleep, Irene remained awake, thinking about how their lives had changed in just 3 days. Through the window, she could see the lights of New Orleans shining in the night, feeling as distant from her previous routine as they looked. Whatever tomorrow brought, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The morning of the 3rd day dawned with a clear sky over New Orleans, and the first rays of sun penetrated the blinds in the presidential suite of St. Raphael's Hospital. Carmen Vance, who had finally agreed to sleep for a few hours on a sofa bed in the room, was awakened by the gentle touch of Teresa, the night shift nurse. Ma'am, Teresa whispered, a smile on her lips. I think he's waking up. Carmen shot up, still disoriented from her interrupted sleep, and quickly approached the bed. Richard's eyes were half open, blinking slowly as if trying to adjust to the brightness of the room. The respirator tubes were still in place, preventing him from speaking, but his eyes, once empty and lost, now showed consciousness, focusing on his wife's face as she drew near. Richard? She called, her voice thick with emotion. Can you hear me? The slight squeeze of her hand was all the answer she needed. Tears streamed freely down her face as Teresa checked his vital signs and pressed the emergency button to call the medical team. Within minutes, Dr. Campos and Dr. Hale burst into the room, Followed by a team of nurses and technicians, gently moving Carmen aside, they performed a series of quick exams, assessing reflexes, eye responses, and neurological signs. "Unbelievable," Dr. Hale murmured, checking the monitor readings. "He's returning from a state that very few managed to recover from." Dr. Campos, observing the progression of his vital signs over the last few hours, confirmed what he already suspected. Exactly as Tiana predicted, 3 full cycles, 3 days, for the body to eliminate the toxin and rebalance itself. Carmen, who was listening from a distance, came closer. "Do you think he'll make a full recovery? Will there be any lasting effects?" The doctors exchanged cautious glances. "It's too early to say," Dr. Hale replied, "but the signs are promising. His neurological function is recovering rapidly, and we haven't detected any permanent damage to his major organs. If he continues at this pace, we might be able to try removing the respiratory support in a few days." In the makeshift room where Irene and Tiana were staying, the morning also brought news. Dr. Campos had sent them a special breakfast, accompanied by a handwritten note. "He's awake just as you predicted. The medical team is astonished. When you're ready, Mrs. Vance would like to meet you personally." Tiana, nibbling on a slice of watermelon, smiled matter-of-factly. "See, Mom? Now we can go home." Irene, however, felt torn. Part of her truly wanted to return to her routine, avoiding the spotlight and the complications that would surely come with recognition. But another part was curious to meet the man whose life they had helped save and to understand how this episode would transform their own lives. "Let's meet Mrs. Vance first, honey. It's the least we can do after all the hospitality we've received here." Meanwhile, in the hospital's administrative corridors, another battle was unfolding. The news of Richard Vance's miraculous recovery had leaked to the press, and dozens of reporters were now camped at the entrance of St. Raphael's. Among them, Claudia Foster continued her dogged investigation, having discovered through internal sources that the treatment that saved the businessman involved traditional indigenous knowledge. The hospital's administrative director, Frank Alston, a pragmatic man accustomed to image crises, had convened an emergency committee to define a communication strategy. "We need to control this narrative," he argued, addressing Dr. Hale and other members of the board. "If we confirm that we used a treatment based on traditional knowledge, we open a complex precedent. On the other hand, denying it would be unethical and could generate even more speculation." Dr. Hale remained firm in her position. "I see no reason to hide the truth. We used an experimental treatment, yes, but one based on scientific evidence obtained in our own laboratory. The traditional knowledge was merely the starting point, as is the case with many modern medicines." "And what about the family who provided the plant?" Frank questioned. "The cleaning assistant and the child? How will we protect their privacy?" "That will depend entirely on their wishes," the doctor replied. "If they wish to remain anonymous, we will respect their decision. If they want recognition, we will support that as well." The discussion was interrupted when an assistant rushed into the room. "Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you should know. The journalist Claudia Foster just published an online article titled "Ancestral Wisdom Saves Billionaire, the Indigenous Knowledge Modern Medicine Ignored." It's going viral on social media. Frank stood up, visibly perturbed. How did she get this information so quickly? We need to see exactly what was published before we respond officially. While the communication crisis unfolded on the upper floors, a significant moment was about to take place in the presidential suite. After agreeing to Dr. Campos's suggestion, Carmen had invited Irene and Tiana for a private visit, away from the prying eyes of the press and other staff. When mother and daughter shyly entered the luxurious room, Carmen rose to greet them with an emotional hug. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said, holding Irene's hands. "The doctors told me everything you did for Richard." Irene, uncomfortable with the effusive gratitude, just smiled discreetly. "We didn't do anything special, ma'am. It was Tiana who realized what was happening, and the medical team who prepared the proper treatment." Carmen then turned to the girl, kneeling to be at her eye level. "And you, little hero, how did you know what was affecting my husband?" Tiana, with the disconcerting naturalness that characterized her, shrugged. "By the smell, ma'am. It was the same as what made my turtle sick. Grandma Jurema always said we need to pay attention to the signs nature gives us." The simplicity of the answer moved Carmen even more. In that moment, the social distance that would normally separate a high society socialite from a cleaning assistant and her daughter seemed to have vanished completely. "You've changed our lives forever," she said, looking from Tiana to Irene. "And I want you to know that the Vance family's gratitude won't be limited to words. If anything you need, any dream you have, we will be here to help." Irene, always pragmatic, felt a slight discomfort with the offer. "You're very kind, ma'am, but we didn't help expecting rewards. We're just happy your husband is recovering, and that's enough for us." Before Carmen could insist, a movement on the hospital bed caught everyone's attention. Richard, though still connected to the respirator, had slightly raised his hand as if wanting to join the conversation. His eyes, now wide open, fixed on Tiana with surprising intensity. Dr. Campos, who had been observing the scene discreetly, approached. "He seems to want to communicate. I'll see if we can temporarily remove the breathing tube to allow him to speak for a few minutes." After a quick assessment of Richard's vital signs and respiratory capacity, the medical team proceeded with the temporary removal of the tube, replacing it with an oxygen mask that would allow him to speak briefly. When he finally managed to articulate words, his voice came out hoarse and fragile, but his first words surprised everyone. "Jurema? You look like Jurema." A stunned silence filled the room. Tiana, her eyes wide, looked to her mother for guidance. Irene felt a shiver run down her spine. "How do you know that name, sir?" she finally asked. Richard closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering strength or organizing scattered thoughts. The project, in the bayou, a community near Grand Isle. A healer named Jurema, same eyes as this girl. The revelation hit Irene like a bomb. Grand Isle was exactly the region where her grandmother had lived for many years, before moving to the rural parts of Louisiana where Irene had grown up. "My grandmother," she murmured, approaching the bed. "Jurema was my grandmother. She passed away 5 years ago." A flicker of recognition lit up Richard's tired gaze. "The Preservation Project. We wanted to catalog medicinal plants, in partnership with local communities. Jurema was our lead consultant, but she refused to reveal the secret of some plants, said that not all knowledge should be turned into a product." This revelation brought a new context to the entire situation. Somehow the paths of Richard and Irene's family had already crossed in the past, through the matriarch Jurema. Carmen, who had been listening with growing fascination, turned to her husband. "Is that why you accepted that basket of natural products? Because it came from the community where you met her?" Richard nodded slightly, his strength quickly fading. "Wanted to show their trust, prove that we respected their knowledge. I never imagined." Dr. Campos noticed the patient was tiring and gestured for the conversation to stop. "We need to reinsert the respiratory support. He's still too weak for prolonged conversations." As the medical team readjusted the equipment, Irene remained motionless, processing the incredible coincidence, or was it fate, that had connected her family to Richard Vance's even before the incident at the hospital. "Mum," Tiana called softly, tugging at the sleeve of her uniform. Grandma knew. That's why she appeared in my dream. Those simple words seemed to tie the whole story together in a perfect, mysterious knot. Somehow events had completed a cycle that began years earlier, when Jurema had refused to share certain ancestral knowledge with Richard's company. When they left the suite, mother and daughter were approached by Dr. Campos in the hallway. "I need to warn you about something," he said with a worried expression. "The story has leaked to the press. A journalist published an article about the experimental treatment based on traditional knowledge. She doesn't mention names, but she's investigating intensely." Irene's heart raced. "Does that mean our privacy is at risk?" "Tight in, potentially, yes," the doctor confirmed. "The hospital is trying to control the situation. But it would be wise for you to think about how you want to handle this when you leave here." The cleaning assistant looked at Tiana, who seemed strangely calm in the face of this disturbing news. "What do you think, honey? What should we do?" The girl smiled with that serenity that seemed to carry the wisdom of someone much older. "Grandma always said that truth is like water. It finds its own way. We don't need to hide anything, Mom, but we don't have to stand in the middle of the river either." Dr. Campos couldn't help but smile at the insightful metaphor. "Wise words. If you prefer to maintain discretion, the hospital can help protect your identity." And I'm sure the Vance family will also do everything possible to respect your wishes." As they were talking, Dr. Hale approached hurriedly. "Dr. Campos, we need you in the board meeting, and—" She hesitated, looking at Irene and Tiana. "You two have been invited as well. The matter directly concerns you." In the spacious boardroom, a heated discussion was already underway when the four of them entered. Frank Alston, the administrative director, stopped speaking when he saw them and gestured for them to sit. "Glad you could make it," he said, trying to maintain a cordial tone despite the evident tension. "We are discussing how to proceed regarding the recent discoveries involving Mr. Vance's case." Around the table, besides the main medical team, were a legal representative from the hospital and, surprisingly, Henry Vance, Richard's brother and vice president of Health Tech America. "The situation is delicate," Frank continued. "On one hand, we have a potentially revolutionary discovery, a compound not listed in any pharmacological database that has shown impressive therapeutic effects. On the other hand, we have issues of intellectual property, traditional knowledge, and of course the privacy of everyone involved." Henry Vance, a middle-aged man with features resembling his brother's, but with a harder, more calculating expression, leaned forward. "From Health Tech's point of view, the scientific interest is undeniable. We would like to propose a partnership to research and develop this compound." His eyes fixed on Irene, sizing her up, obviously with full respect for traditional knowledge and with adequate compensation for the original holders of that knowledge. Irene felt uneasy with the direction of the conversation. Tiana, sitting beside her, remained strangely quiet, observing each person in the room with attentive eyes. "I'm not sure this is an appropriate discussion right now," Dr. Hale intervened. "Mr. Vance has barely begun his recovery, and we're already talking about commercially exploiting what saved him." Henry made a dismissive gesture. "Just thinking about the future, Doctor. This compound could save other lives if properly studied and made available." "I agree on the importance of research," said Dr. Campos, "but I disagree with the approach. Any future study would need to be conducted with full ethical transparency and respect for the traditional knowledge that made this discovery possible." The discussion continued, with technical, scientific, and ethical arguments being thrown from all sides. Irene felt increasingly out of place, as if she were watching a play in a foreign language. This world of intellectual property, patents, and pharmaceutical development was far removed from her daily reality. It was then that Tiana, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, suddenly stood up. All eyes turned to her, surprised by the child's unexpected gesture. "The plant doesn't want to be medicine in a bottle," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Grandma Jurema already told the sick man that when they met. Some plants need to be used the right way with respect. If you put it in a bottle, it loses its strength." The silence that followed those words was almost palpable. Henry Vance looked disconcerted, while Dr. Campos and Dr. Hale exchanged significant glances. The wisdom of those simple words had exposed the fragility of the grandiose plans they were discussing. "Besides," Tiana continued, seemingly oblivious to the impact she was having, "the Bayou Sai only grows in special places where the earth and air are clean. If too many people start looking for it, they'll end up destroying the places where it lives." Frank Alston cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the meeting. "Well, those are important considerations. Perhaps we need more time to evaluate all the implications before making any decisions." Irene, feeling a sudden pride in her daughter, stood up as well. "If I may," she said with a firmness that surprised herself, "I would like to remind everyone that neither my daughter nor I came here seeking rewards or business deals. Our only goal was to help someone in need, using knowledge passed down through our family." She took a deep breath before continuing. "As for the future of this knowledge, I believe my daughter has perfectly expressed what my grandmother always advocated. Some things are not meant to be commercialized or mass-produced. They need to be respected in their original context." The meeting ended shortly after, with no definitive conclusions, but with a tacit agreement that no decision would be made without the explicit consent of Irene and Tiana, and, of course, of Richard Vance once he was fully recovered. Upon returning to the room where they were staying, Irene felt emotionally drained. The past few days had been a roller coaster of unexpected events, and now she had to make decisions that could affect not only their future, but potentially that of many others. "What do you think we should do, Tiana?" she asked, sitting on the bed next to her daughter. "About the plant, about all of this?" The girl, who was drawing peacefully, looked up from her paper. "I think we've already done what we were supposed to do, Mom. We helped the man. Now it's time to go home and take care of our garden." There was so much simplicity and wisdom in those words that Irene felt her eyes fill with tears. Amidst all the adult complexity of corporate interests, intellectual property and social status, her 7-year-old daughter could see the essential truth. They had fulfilled their purpose and now needed to return to their own lives. "You're right, honey. We'll go home tomorrow." That night, while Tiana slept soundly, Irene wrote a simple letter addressed to the Vance family. In it, she expressed her gratitude for their hospitality and recognition, but made it clear that her wish was to return to a normal life, far from the spotlight and the complications this discovery had generated. As for the knowledge of the Bayou's Sai, she explained that she would follow her grandmother Jurema's wish. The plant would remain as family knowledge, to be used with respect and only when necessary. She did not oppose scientific studies of its properties, as long as they were conducted ethically and without immediate commercial intent. Finally, she asked for only one thing in return for everything they had done: that Health Tech America establish a preservation program for the native areas where the Bayou's Sai and other traditional medicinal plants grew. It would be a way to honor Jurema's legacy and ensure that this ancestral knowledge was not lost to future generations. Upon finishing the letter, Irene felt a strange inner peace, as if she had finally found a balance between the very different worlds that had collided in that extraordinary week. The next morning, she handed the sealed envelope to Dr. Campos, asking him to deliver it to the Vance family when he deemed it appropriate. Then, with the few belongings they had brought, she prepared to leave the hospital discreetly, avoiding the press that was still camped at the main entrance. "Are you sure you don't want to wait to say goodbye in person?" asked the doctor, who had grown genuinely fond of the unusual pair. Irene smiled, holding Tiana's hand tightly. "I think we've already said our goodbyes in the way that matters, Doctor. Now it's time to let life take its natural course." Dr. Campos nodded, understanding the wisdom of her decision. "You will always be welcome here, you know that. And if you ever need anything—" "You've already done more than enough," Irene interrupted gently. "You were the only one who listened to us when everyone else would have thought it was crazy. We will never forget that." Tiana, who had been observing the conversation in silence, approached the doctor and, in an unexpected gesture, offered him a small paper-wrapped object. "So you'll remember," she said simply. When Dr. Campos opened the package, he found a single, carefully preserved seed of the Bayou's Sai. "Not for planting," the girl explained. "Just to remember that sometimes the simplest answer is hidden in the most unlikely place." With those parting words, Irene and Tiana left St. Raphael's Hospital through a service exit, returning to the simplicity of their life on the outskirts of New Orleans. They left behind not only a man whose life they had saved, but also a medical case that would challenge modern science and reignite discussions about the value of traditional knowledge in the age of technological medicine. In the garden of her modest home, while watering the plants that a neighbor had cared for during her absence, Irene watched Tiana playing with the recovered turtle. The everyday scene contrasted sharply with the intensity of the past few days, but it brought a comforting sense of normalcy and belonging. "Do you think they'll respect our wishes, honey?" she asked, implicitly referring to the letter she had left. "About the plant, about leaving us in peace?" Tiana smiled, with that quiet confidence she seemed to have inherited directly from Jurema. "They will, Mom. The sick man understood what Grandma tried to teach him a long time ago. Sometimes we have to almost lose something to understand its true value." Irene marveled once again at the depth of her daughter's observations. It was as if, through her, the wisdom of generations spoke directly to the present, creating a bridge between worlds and times that seemed irreconcilable. As evening fell, sitting on the small porch of their house, mother and daughter watched the sunset paint the New Orleans sky with shades of orange and pink. Amidst the distant noise of the big city, the small medicinal garden remained an oasis of ancestral knowledge, preserved by simple but wise hands. "Did you know they're going to build a research center for medicinal plants?" Tiana commented casually, as if talking about the weather, but not to make medicine in a bottle. To teach people about the plants, to preserve the knowledge. Grandma Jurema will like that. Irene turned, surprised. How do you know that, honey? We just got back. The girl shrugged with that mysterious smile. I just know, Mom, like I knew about the plant and the sick man. Some things you just know. And with that enigmatic statement, she went back to playing with her turtle, leaving Irene to contemplate the mystery of that extraordinary gift which, like the Bayou's Sai itself, seemed to flourish only under very special conditions, far from the prying eyes and grasping hands of the modern world. Meanwhile, in the presidential suite of St. Raphael's Hospital, Richard Vance, now breathing without assistance and fully conscious, read the letter left by Irene intently. Beside him, Carmen watched with anticipation. What does she say? She finally asked, as her husband carefully folded the paper. Richard remained silent for a few moments, his gaze lost in memories that seemed to come from another life, both from the recent near-death experience and from the encounter, years earlier, with the matriarch Jurema. She says exactly what her grandmother told me 7 years ago, when I tried to buy her knowledge, he finally replied, that some things are priceless, not because they're too expensive, but because their value lies precisely in remaining free. He looked up at his wife, a new determination shining in his eyes. And she's right, Carmen. I almost had to die to find out what really matters. And what are you going to do? Carmen asked, holding his hand tenderly. Exactly what I promised Jurema years ago and never truly fulfilled. Use Health Tech's resources to preserve, not to exploit. Create a sanctuary for these plants. Fund ethical research that respects traditional knowledge instead of just extracting what seems commercially viable. He paused, looking out the window at the same sunset that Irene and Tiana were contemplating from their simple porch. And maybe in the process, we can rediscover some of that wisdom we lost when we drifted so far from nature. Dr. Campos, who had quietly entered the room during their conversation, smiled upon hearing those words. In his hand, he toyed absently with the small seed Tiana had given him, not for planting, but to remember that healing sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. I'm glad to hear that. Mr. Vance, he commented, approaching the bed, because I think we've just witnessed something more significant than a miraculous medical recovery. What exactly? Richard asked, curious. The healing of a relationship, the doctor replied, between modern and traditional knowledge, between the businessman and the community, between man and nature. Perhaps that was the true lesson of the Bayou's Sai. And as night fell over New Orleans, covering both the luxurious hospital suite and the modest backyard on the outskirts, the seeds of that extraordinary experience began to germinate, promising transformations far beyond what anyone could have imagined at that moment. With a racing heart, Irene picked up the phone. Hello? Ms. Olivier. Richard Vance's voice sounded clear and strong, a far cry from the fragile whisper she had heard in the hospital months ago. It's a pleasure to finally be able to speak with you again. How are you and little Tiana? We're well, Mr. Vance. We've just seen the research center. It's impressive. I'm glad you like it. It's just the beginning of something I hope will become much larger. A small token of gratitude for the gift of life you gave me. There was a genuine humility in his voice that surprised Irene. The man speaking now seemed very different from the powerful, imposing businessman the media used to portray. I would have loved to be there today, he continued, but I'm in D.C., trying to convince our legislators that traditional knowledge needs to be protected and valued, not just commercially exploited. That's a noble cause, Irene commented. My grandmother Jurema would be happy to know you're championing that now. There was an emotion-filled pause on the other end of the line. You know, Miss Olivier, when I met your grandmother 7 years ago, I was a different man. I saw traditional knowledge only as a source of potential innovations for my company. She tried to show me a broader perspective, but I wasn't ready to listen. I had to nearly die to finally understand what she was trying to teach me. Irene smiled, remembering her grandmother's quiet wisdom. She always said that everyone has their own time to understand certain truths. And your daughter Tiana, is she there with you? Yes, she's right here beside me. May I speak with her for a moment? Irene handed the phone to her daughter, who took it curiously. Hello? Hello, Tiana. Richard's voice was warm. I wanted to personally thank you for recognizing what was happening to me when no one else could see it. The girl smiled. It wasn't me, it was the plant's smell. And Grandma Jurema taught me to pay attention. Even so, your gift is special, and I wanted you to know that we are honoring your great-grandmother's memory in the best way we can. The garden named after her is just the beginning. Tiana nodded as if she could be seen through the phone. I know, she showed me in my dream. She's happy with what you're doing. There was a silence on the other end of the line, as if Richard were processing those simple yet profound words. That means a great deal to me, Tiana, more than you can imagine. After they said their goodbyes, the girl handed the phone back to Dr. Campos, who seemed moved by what he had just witnessed. You know, he commented as he put the phone away, in my entire medical career I've seen many patients transformed by near-death experiences, but I've never seen a transformation as profound and significant as Richard Vance's. Irene nodded, understanding. Sometimes we have to reach the edge to see what truly matters. The tour continued for a while longer, with Rachel showing them other areas of the center, including a library dedicated to literature on traditional Sai, medicine from all over the United States, and a space for hands-on workshops, where children and adults could learn to cultivate and use medicinal plants responsibly. In every detail, it was possible to see the care taken to honor both scientific and traditional knowledge, creating bridges of mutual respect instead of hierarchies of value. As they were about to end the tour, Dr. Campos made an unexpected invitation. Irene, we would very much like to have you participate here at the center on a regular basis. Not as a formal employee or anything that would compromise your current job, but as a special consultant for our educational program. Irene blinked, surprised. Me, but I'm just a cleaning assistant with some basic knowledge I learned from my grandmother. Precisely, Rachel intervened. You represent that genuine transmission of knowledge between generations, that learning that happens in everyday life, in the practice of care. Furthermore, your humility and your commitment to preserving traditional knowledge without commercializing it are exactly the values we want to convey to our visitors. Dr. Campos nodded, adding, once a month on Saturdays you could come with Tiana and other children from the community for a practical workshop in the Jurema garden. Teach about the plants, you know, tell stories about your grandmother, show how to prepare simple home remedies, all documented with your consent, of course, and with adequate compensation for your time and knowledge. The proposal was tempting. For her entire life, Irene had believed her knowledge of medicinal plants was of little value in the modern world, useful only in a family or community context, but irrelevant in major scientific or educational circles. Now she was being invited to share this wisdom at a cutting-edge research center, with the same status and respect afforded to academic researchers. Can I think about it? She asked, genuinely touched by the invitation. Of course, Dr. Campos replied. There's no rush. We want you to feel completely comfortable with whatever decision you make. Before they parted, Rachel gave Irene and Tiana a gift, a healthy seedling of Bayou Sai, cultivated from seeds from Irene's own garden. It's a symbol of the cycle coming full circle, the botanist explained. The knowledge that came from your family helped create this center, and now a plant grown here returns to your garden. On the way back home, in the taxi provided by the center, Irene remained silent, reflecting on everything she had seen and heard that extraordinary morning. Beside her, Tiana was also quiet, looking out the window at the urban landscape of New Orleans that slowly gave way to the simpler buildings of the outskirts where they lived. What did you think, honey? She finally asked, curious about the girl's impressions. Tiana turned, with a serene smile that so resembled her great-grandmother's. I liked it a lot, Mom. It's good to see they're taking care of the plants with respect, like Grandma Jurema taught. And what do you think about us going back there to teach other children about our garden? It would be very different from our normal life. The girl thought for a moment before answering. I think it would be good. Grandma always said that knowledge kept to oneself withers, like a plant without water. We need to share it to keep it alive. Those simple words contained a profound wisdom that resonated in Irene's heart. Perhaps this was the next natural step in her journey, not just to preserve her family's ancestral knowledge, but also to share it consciously and controllably, ensuring its value and essence were respected. Days later, After carefully considering the invitation, Irene called Dr. Campos to accept the proposal to collaborate with the center. In the following weeks, her routine gained a new element. On Saturdays, once a month, she and Tiana would travel to the Center for Research in Traditional Medicine to conduct workshops in the Jurema Garden. The sessions quickly became a hit with visitors. There was something magnetic about the simple, direct way Irene shared her knowledge, without scientific jargon or academic pretensions, just the practical wisdom passed down from generation to generation. And Tiana, with her natural gift for identifying and explaining the properties of plants, charmed children and adults alike. During one of these workshops, 3 months after her first visit to the center, something special happened. Among the participants was an elderly woman from a historic Creole community in rural Louisiana. After the presentation, she shyly approached Irene. "Miss," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I knew your grandmother, Miss Jurema. She taught me how to care for herbs when I was a girl, back in the Grand Isle area more than 50 years ago." Irene felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was rare for her to meet someone who had personally known her grandmother during her most active years as a healer. "You knew her? What was she like back then?" The elderly woman smiled, her eyes shining with distant memories. "She was a strong, wise woman, respected by everyone. White, black, rich, poor, everyone came for her advice and remedies. And she never refused to help anyone, even when they couldn't pay." Irene nodded, recognizing her grandmother in that description. "She stayed that way until the end. But do you know what impressed me most?" The woman continued. "It was how she talked about the future. She said that one day the knowledge of the old ways and the knowledge of the new ways would meet in harmony, no longer in conflict. That the wisdom of the plants would be valued again, not as a commodity, but as a heritage for all." The elderly woman paused, looking around at the research center and then at Tiana, who was playing with other children near the garden. "And it seems she was right, wasn't she? This place, what you're doing here, it's exactly what Miss Jurema foresaw." That casual conversation opened a door to a new understanding. In the following months, Irene began to systematically collect stories about her grandmother, creating an archive of oral memories that complemented the practical knowledge of plants she had inherited. The research center supported the initiative, providing recording equipment and helping to locate people who had known Jurema at different stages of her life. Gradually, a more complete portrait emerged of that extraordinary woman who had dedicated her existence to preserving and sharing ancestral knowledge about American medicinal flora. And through this process, Irene felt increasingly connected to her own roots. Better understanding the legacy, it was now her turn to continue. Tiana, for her part, flourished in this environment that valued her special gift. At her new school, she excelled not only academically, but also for her unique knowledge of plants and ecology, often sharing stories and information with teachers and classmates that surprised even the most scholarly. One afternoon, as they were returning from another workshop at the center, Tiana asked a question that took Irene by surprise. "Mom, do you think I'll be a doctor one day like Dr. Campos?" Irene looked at her daughter, realizing that the question reflected ambitions and dreams that were beginning to take shape in the girl's mind. "Do you want to be a doctor, honey?" Tiana thought for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe, or maybe a botanist like Rachel, or something that doesn't exist yet, that mixes both kinds of knowledge, Grandma Jurema's and the kind from college. You can be whatever you want. Tiana, you have a special gift and a brilliant mind. The important thing is to use those talents to do good, like your great-grandmother did." The girl smiled, satisfied with the answer. "Did you know that at the center, they're making a new medicine using the Bayou's Sai? Not to sell, but to donate to public hospitals." "Really?" Irene hadn't heard about this specific development. "How did you find out?" "Dr. Campos told me in secret. He said it's a special project inspired by our story. And guess what? They're going to call it the Jurema formula." That revelation touched Irene deeply. The idea that her grandmother's knowledge, preserved through generations, could now benefit people on a large scale without being commercially exploited, was the perfect fulfillment of the legacy Jurema had always wished to leave. A full year had passed since the events at St. Raphael's Hospital. New Orleans was preparing for its summer festivals, with colorful banners decorating the streets, and the aroma of traditional foods filling the air. At Irene's house, the medicinal garden was in full splendor, with new varieties added and a small nursery built to propagate seedlings to be donated to the community. On that sunny Sunday morning, Irene received an unexpected visit. Carmen Vance, Richard's wife, accompanied by Dr. Campos, elegant as always, but with a deliberate simplicity in her attire. Carmen carried an envelope in her hands. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," she said after the initial greetings, "but we wanted to deliver this in person." It was an invitation to the inauguration ceremony of the first branch of the Center for Research in Traditional Medicine, to be built in an environmental reserve in the Amazon region, in partnership with local indigenous communities. "Richard would very much like for you to be there," Carmen explained. "This project has become the central mission of our lives since you brought him back to us." Dr. Campos added, "The success of the center in New Orleans has exceeded all expectations. In just 1 year, we've managed to document and preserve traditional knowledge about more than 100 medicinal plants, established partnerships with 15 traditional communities, and our educational program has already reached over 10,000 students. And most importantly," Carmen continued, "we've done it all following the model you taught us, valuing traditional knowledge without exploiting it, building bridges instead of hierarchies, and sharing benefits with the communities of origin." Irene felt emotional and a little overwhelmed. She had never imagined that the episode with the Bayou Sai would have such broad and positive repercussions. Tiana, who had overheard the conversation while watering the plants, approached with her usual serene smile. "Are we going, Mom?" she asked simply. "Grandma Jurema would like that." And once again, the girl's natural wisdom provided the perfect answer. Yes, they would go, not as celebrities or central figures, but as witnesses to a healing process much larger than the physical recovery of one man, the healing of a broken relationship between traditional knowledge and modern science, between ancestral communities and contemporary society. The night before their trip to the Amazon, Irene found Tiana sitting in the garden, watching the stars while stroking the turtle, now almost fully grown. The scene conveyed such a deep peace that she hesitated to interrupt, but the girl sensed her presence and turned with a smile. "Are you happy with our new life, honey?" Irene asked, sitting beside her on the small wooden bench. Tiana reflected for a moment. "I like it, Mom. It's different, but it's still ours. And now more people can learn what Grandma Jurema taught." "Sometimes I wonder if this is what she wanted," Irene confessed. "If we're on the right path." The girl looked up at the stars again before answering. "In my dream last night, she was sitting in a boat sailing on a very big river. I think it was the Amazon. She was smiling and waving at us from the shore." "I think that's a yes, don't you?" Irene hugged her daughter, marveling once more at the special connection Tiana maintained with her great-grandmother, transcending the limits of time and space. "Yes, my dear, I think that's definitely a yes." And as the stars shone over the small garden on the outskirts of New Orleans, mother and daughter remained in contemplative silence, feeling part of something much larger than themselves, an unbroken stream of knowledge and care flowing through the generations, like a powerful and serene river, always finding new paths to move forward. The next day, as they boarded the plane that would take them to the Amazon, Irene looked out the window at the city of New Orleans, falling away behind them. The contrast between the urban metropolis and the dense green of the forest they would soon see was the same contrast between the worlds they had now learned to connect, the traditional and the modern, the ancestral and the contemporary, intuition and science. Tiana, sitting beside her, held tightly to a small seed of Bayou Sai inside a silver locket, a gift from Richard and Carmen Vance. It was a perfect symbol of what they had experienced and what was yet to come. The small seed that, under the right circumstances and with the proper care, could blossom into infinite possibilities. "We're getting close. Mom," Tiana said, pointing to the clouds that were beginning to dissipate, revealing the endless green carpet of the Amazon rainforest. "I can feel it's going to be special." And Irene, holding her daughter's hand, knew with absolute certainty that she was right, just as she had been on that crucial day at St. Raphael's Hospital, when a child with the special gift of hearing nature, and a mother brave enough to give voice to that gift, had changed not just one individual destiny, but had initiated a much broader and deeper transformation. "Yes, honey," she replied, feeling a peace she had never imagined possible in her previously simple and anonymous life. "It will be special, and we'll be there to see, learn, and share, exactly as your great-grandmother Jurema taught us." The arrival in the Amazon was an awakening of the senses for Tiana and Irene. The humid, dense air, laden with unfamiliar scents, the constant symphony of birds and insects, the lush green in infinite variations. Everything seemed alive and pulsating in a way they had never experienced in New Orleans. The small Manaus airport was decorated with discreet banners announcing the inauguration of the Amazonian branch of the Center for Research in Traditional Medicine. A reception team awaited the special guests, including the mother and daughter, who were greeted with the same mixture of respect and curiosity they had grown accustomed to arousing in recent months. "Welcome to the Amazon," greeted Paul Myers, a middle-aged botanist with strong indigenous features and a gentle smile. "I'm the local project coordinator. It's an honor to finally meet you." During the boat trip along the Rio Negro, Paul explained how the Amazonian project had been conceived. Unlike the center in New Orleans, here we started from scratch, in full partnership with the local communities. We didn't build a building and then invite the holders of traditional knowledge. First, we established the partnerships and then designed the physical structure, according to the needs and values of these communities. Tiana watched the riverside scenery with fascination, occasionally pointing to plants she recognized intuitively, despite never having seen them before. "That one cures a sore throat, doesn't it?" she asked, indicating a vine with orange flowers growing near the bank. Paul's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, exactly. The river people call it fire tongue. How did you know?" The girl shrugged with that disconcerting naturalness. "By the way it grows, reaching for the sun even in the shade. Plants that fight like that usually help the throat and lungs. Grandma Jurema always said that." The botanist exchanged an admiring glance with Irene. "Your daughter has a truly extraordinary gift." The Amazonian Center was located in a natural clearing surrounded by dense forest on the banks of a small tributary. The architecture fully respected the environment. Elevated structures on stilts, roofs of treated thatch, walls of certified wood, and large open areas that allowed for natural ventilation. There was no air conditioning, only passive cooling systems inspired by local traditional knowledge. We tried to create a space that reflects the balance we seek between different kinds of knowledge, Paul explained. Modern technology when necessary, ancestral wisdom whenever possible. Upon disembarking, they were greeted by a committee composed of representatives from various indigenous and riverside communities involved in the project. An elderly woman, short in stature with a face marked by time, stood out from the group and approached Tiana directly with a penetrating gaze. "You are the girl of the plant," she stated in simple but direct English. "The one who sees what others do not." Tiana nodded, holding the elder's gaze without intimidation. "And you are a healer. I can tell by the smell of your hands." The old woman broke into a smile, revealing few teeth. "My name is Asusina. I have been a shaman of the Desana people for 52 years. When I heard your story, I said, I want to meet this girl." Irene watched the interaction with a mix of pride and apprehension. On one hand, she was happy to see Tiana's gift recognized and respected by people who shared similar traditions. On the other, she still worried about the weight this attention might place on a child's shoulders. "Come," Asusina invited. "The other guests only arrive tomorrow. Today is for you to get to know the true heart of this place." The official inauguration ceremony was scheduled for the next day, with the presence of Richard Vance, government officials, representatives from scientific institutions, and the press. But that afternoon, mother and daughter had the privilege of an exclusive tour, guided by those who were the true soul of the project. Asusina led them along forest trails, identifying medicinal plants, explaining their properties, and the rituals associated with their use. At each stop, Tiana asked surprisingly precise questions or shared observations that impressed even the local experts. "How can a child from the coast know so much about our plants?" One of the guides asked Irene, genuinely intrigued. "It's not knowledge in the usual sense," she explained. "It's more a form of perception she inherited from her great-grandmother. She feels the plants in a way I can't fully explain. As evening approached, they reached a special clearing within the center's territory, a circular garden where medicinal species from various regions of the Amazon had been gathered, not as a conventional botanical collection, but as a sacred space for healing and teaching. The Circle of Knowledge, Azucena presented. Here, shamans from different peoples come to share knowledge, resolve conflicts, and teach the younger ones. It is our main space at the center. In the middle of the circle, surprisingly, was a young but vigorous seedling of Bayou Sai, brought especially from Louisiana. Beside it, a discreet plaque briefly told the story of Tiana, Irene and Richard Vance, without full names or photographs, only as the girl, the mother, and the businessman, a modern fable about the connection between different worlds. It was the Decenna's idea, explained Paul, who was with them. They said your story perfectly represents the spirit of this place. Traditional knowledge saving lives in the modern world, building bridges instead of walls. Tiana approached the seedling with reverence, stroking its leaves as if greeting an old friend. It's happy here, she stated with conviction. Different but happy. It will grow strong. Azucena watched the girl's interactions intently. You have the calling, she said finally. The same one I received when I was your age. The call to be a bridge between worlds. Irene felt a shiver run down her spine. It was exactly how her grandmother Jurema described her own gift. Not as something special that made her superior, but as a responsibility to connect realities that had grown apart. Night fell quickly, as is typical in the Amazon region, and they were settled into one of the center's guest cabins, simple but comfortable, with traditional hammocks and modern mosquito nets. Through the open windows, they could hear the nocturnal sounds of the forest, a complex and mysterious symphony that gradually lulled them into a deep sleep. Irene dreamed of her grandmother Jurema. In the dream, they were both sitting on the bank of a river that seemed to be the Rio Negro, watching Tiana on the other side, talking animatedly with Azucena. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the simultaneous seriousness and joy on her daughter's face. She is ready for the next step, Jurema said in the dream, her voice exactly as Irene remembered it, firm and warm at the same time. The circle is closing, but also expanding. I'm scared, Grandma, Irene confessed. What if it's too much for her? She's just a child. Jurema smiled with that quiet wisdom that characterized her. You were also just a child when I began to teach you. The gift does not wait for adulthood, my dear. It comes when it is needed. Before Irene could reply, a ray of sunlight streamed through the cabin window, waking her. She opened her eyes to find Tiana already awake, sitting in the next hammock, drawing something in a notebook. Good morning, honey. What are you doing? Tiana turned the notebook, showing a drawing of a circle of plants, very similar to the circle of knowledge they had visited the day before, but with some differences in the arrangement of the species. I drew what Miss Azucena and I talked about in our dream, she explained calmly. She showed me how the circle should be to be complete. Irene felt a chill remembering her own dream. You dreamed with Azucena last night? The girl nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yes, and with Grandma Jurema too. They were talking about me, and about how the Bayou Sai needs to be planted with 7 other plants to create a circle of protection. The day of the official ceremony dawned sunny and hot. The center quickly filled with important guests, politicians, scientists, journalists, business leaders, as well as representatives from all the partner indigenous and riverside communities. The inauguration had been planned to coincide with the summer solstice, a date of special significance for many of the local traditions. Richard and Carmen Vance arrived mid-morning, accompanied by Dr. Campos and a small team from the center's headquarters in New Orleans. When they spotted Irene and Tiana talking with Azucena under the shade of a tree, they approached immediately. The meeting was warm but discreet. Richard, fully recovered from his near-death experience, hugged Irene with genuine affection and knelt to be at Tiana's eye level. I'm so glad you accepted our invitation to come, he said, looking alternately at mother and daughter. This place represents everything I've learned from you and from the whole journey we've been on. Tiana smiled, studying the businessman's face intently. You're different, lighter. The shadow that was around you is gone. Richard blinked, surprised. Even after all these months, The girl's sharp perception still disconcerted him. "Yes, I do feel lighter, as if I left behind a weight I didn't even know I was carrying." Dr. Campos, observing the interaction with interest, commented, "It's fascinating how near-death experiences can completely transform our perspective on life and our values." "It wasn't just that," Richard replied thoughtfully. "It was the encounter with a wisdom I had always considered secondary, until I realized it had answers that my technological world couldn't offer." Azucena, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "The rich man learned the lesson of humility. That is good." Her tone was not one of judgment, but a simple statement of fact. The official ceremony began at noon, with brief but significant speeches. Contrary to what would be expected at traditional corporate events, the first to speak were the representatives of the indigenous and riverside communities, followed by scientists and researchers, and only then by Richard Vance and government officials. "This is not a conventional research center," Richard declared in his speech. "It is a meeting place for worlds that should never have been separated. A place where traditional knowledge and modern science can dialogue on equal terms, recognizing the unique value of each approach." He paused meaningfully before continuing. "A year ago I was a different man. I saw traditional knowledge only as a potential source of innovations that could be commercially exploited. I needed a transformative experience and two extraordinary people who honor us with their presence today to understand that the true value of this knowledge lies precisely in the cultural, spiritual and community context in which it exists." His eyes met Irene's and Tiana's in the audience. He did not mention them by name, respecting their wish for discretion, but everyone involved knew exactly to whom he was referring. "This center was conceived based on 3 fundamental principles," he continued. "First, absolute respect for the intellectual property of traditional communities over their knowledge. Second, the commitment that any benefits derived from this knowledge will be shared equitably. And third, the preservation not only of the plants themselves, but of the ecosystems and cultural contexts that give meaning to this knowledge." The most anticipated part of the ceremony came next, the signing of an unprecedented agreement between the Vance Foundation, representatives of 17 traditional communities, 4 American universities, and the Environmental Protection Agency. The document established the groundwork for a new model of collaborative research that formally recognized the scientific, cultural, and economic value of traditional knowledge. "This is just the beginning," Richard announced at the end. "Our goal is to replicate this model in other regions of the United States and eventually create an international network that connects traditional knowledge from around the world, always respecting the cultural particularities of each region." After the speeches and the signing of the agreement, there was a community lunch where all attendees, from officials to members of local communities, shared the same meal, prepared with ingredients from the forest according to traditional recipes. It was a perfect metaphor for the project's spirit, the union of different worlds around something fundamental and shared. During the afternoon, guests could visit the different areas of the center, laboratories equipped with state-of-the-art technology, but designed to work in direct collaboration with traditional knowledge. Herbariums that documented not only botanical characteristics, but also stories, legends, and rituals associated with each plant. And educational spaces where young people from local communities learned to value and record the knowledge of their ancestors. Significant part of the center was dedicated to reforestation and sustainable management projects, using ancestral cultivation techniques that allowed for the regeneration of the forest in degraded areas. It was a concrete demonstration of how traditional knowledge could offer solutions to contemporary environmental problems. As the day wore on, Irene noticed that Tiana and Azucena had disappeared. She wasn't worried at first. Her daughter was safe in that environment, and the Desana shaman had clearly developed a special connection with her. But when the sun began to set, and the two had still not returned, she decided to look for them. She found them in the circle of knowledge, accompanied by 7 other women of different ages, from a young woman of perhaps 15 to an elder who looked even older than Azucena. They were sitting in silence around the Bayou Sai seedling, which was now surrounded by 7 other plants arranged exactly as in the drawing Tiana had made that morning. "Mum," Tiana called upon seeing her approach, Come meet the Council of Guardians. Azucena gestured for Irene to join the circle. These are women like you and your daughter, she explained. Each from a different people, each a guardian of the knowledge of specific plants. We have gathered today for the first time, brought by dreams and by the news of the girl who sees what the plants say. Irene sat down hesitantly, feeling the weight of the moment. There was something ritualistic and solemn in the air, as if she were witnessing the birth of something significant. For generations we have kept our knowledge separate, Azucena continued. Each tribe, each community protecting its secrets, afraid they would be stolen or misused. But times are changing. The forest is threatened. The young forget the knowledge of the elders. We need a new approach. The oldest elder, introduced as Jasiara of the Tucano people, added in a frail but firm voice, "When we heard the story of the girl and the plant that saved the rich man, we saw a sign. It is time to unite our knowledge, not to turn it into a commodity, but to ensure it survives and continues to serve." One of the younger women, named Jandira, explained, "We have formed this Council of Guardians to work with the research center, ensuring our knowledge is respected and used correctly. We want our wisdom to help heal people, but without losing its sacred essence." Tiana, who had listened in respectful silence, finally spoke. "And they want me to be part of the council. Mom, not now, but when I'm older, to be a bridge between Grandma Jurema's knowledge and the knowledge here in the Amazon." Irene felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. It was an extraordinary honor, but also an immense responsibility for a child. "Do not worry," Azucena reassured her, sensing her hesitation. "We do not want to take away her childhood or overwhelm her. The path of a guardian is long and gradual. She will continue to be a normal child, going to school, playing with friends. She will only visit the Amazon a few times a year to learn from us and share what she knows." The proposal was sensible and respectful. It was not about turning Tiana into some kind of child shaman or celebrity, but about recognizing her special gift and offering her a path to develop it over time, always respecting her own pace and will. "What do you think, honey?" Irene asked, leaving the decision in Tiana's hands. "Is this something you would like?" The girl nodded seriously. "Yes, Mom, I feel it's the right thing to do. Grandma Jurema would be happy." And so, as the sun set over the Amazon, marking the end of the solstice, a new pact was sealed, not with official documents or public ceremonies, but with the solemn simplicity of a circle of women gathered around sacred plants, each representing a lineage of knowledge stretching back centuries or even millennia. For Irene, it was the perfect conclusion to a journey that had begun so improbably that night at St. Raphael's Hospital. From a simple cleaning assistant noticing the familiar scent of a plant, to a participant in a council of guardians of ancestral knowledge. From a mother worried about her daughter's unusual gift, to the proud mentor of a new generation of bridges between worlds. Later, when night had fallen and an informal celebration was underway at the center, with music, dance, and traditional food, Richard Vance quietly approached Irene, who was watching Tiana dance with indigenous children around a bonfire. "Dr. Campos told me about the Council of Guardians," he commented. "It's an incredible honor for Tiana." Irene nodded. "It is, and a little scary too, to be honest. I understand completely. But seeing her now?" He gestured towards the bonfire where Tiana was laughing and playing, completely at ease among her new friends. "She seems able to navigate between worlds without losing her essence." "It's a rare gift. How are you feeling?" Irene asked, changing the subject. "It's been exactly 1 year today since you were so close to leaving," Richard completed without discomfort. "I am better than I have ever been, not just physically but in every sense. That experience, and everything that came after, transformed me in ways I am still discovering." He paused, watching the bonfire flames reflected in the animated faces of the children. "You know, I spent half my life seeking innovations, always thinking about the future, the next technological breakthrough, the next revolutionary discovery. I had to almost leave to realize that some of the most important answers already existed for centuries, preserved by people I always considered, well, less advanced. Grandma Jurema used to say that knowledge is like a river," Irene commented. "Sometimes it flows on the surface, visible to all. Other times it dives underground, becoming invisible, only to resurface later when the conditions are right." Richard smiled, appreciating the metaphor. Your Amazon project is exactly that, creating the conditions for these underground rivers of knowledge to resurface and flow freely again, not to be dammed and exploited, but to continue their natural course, benefiting everyone. The conversation was interrupted when Tiana ran up to them, breathless and radiant with joy. "Mom, Mr. Vance, come dance with us. The Desina children are teaching a rain dance." And so, in the heart of the Amazon, under a starry sky and to the sound of ancestral chants, the cleaning assistant, the billionaire businessman, and the girl who saw the language of plants danced together in celebration, not just of the new center or the Council of Guardians, but of something much deeper and more significant, the reunion of knowledge that should never have been separated. As the night wore on, Irene watched her daughter interacting with her new friends and mentors, and felt a growing certainty that, despite all the challenges and responsibilities the future held, Tiana would be fine. Her gift was not a burden to be carried, but a bridge to be built, just like the bayou's sigh, which could both harm and heal, depending on how it was used and respected. The next morning, before returning to New Orleans, mother and daughter paid one last visit to the Circle of Knowledge. The sun was rising over the Amazon, illuminating the clearing with a golden light that seemed almost magical. In the center, the bayou's sigh seedling and the 7 plants that now surrounded it looked more vigorous, as if they had grown noticeably overnight. "The circle is complete," Tiana said, gently touching one of the leaves. "Now the plants can talk to each other, share secrets, become stronger together." Irene smiled, recognizing in her daughter's words an echo of the journey they themselves had traveled, from isolation in their small garden on the outskirts of New Orleans to this connection with a network of knowledge guardians that stretched throughout the Amazon and beyond. "It's like us, isn't it?" she commented, stronger together than apart. Tiana nodded with that serene wisdom that seemed to transcend her age. "Yes, Mom, and this is just the beginning." As they walked away from the circle, hand in hand, towards the boat that would take them back to the city, Irene felt a gentle breeze caress her face, like a soft sigh from the forest itself, welcoming them into its ancestral embrace and promising that no matter where they went, they would always have a home in that circle of shared wisdom. And somewhere, perhaps only in Tiana's imagination, or perhaps in a dimension only those truly connected to nature could perceive, Jurema smiled, satisfied to see that the knowledge she had protected with such care throughout her life was now flourishing in ways she could never have foreseen, but which surely filled her with pride and hope. The circle was complete, and at the same time it had just begun,